And for the latest on Tropical Storm Debby and its eventual impacts across the southeast, we're bringing in Deputy Director Jamie Rhome of the National Hurricane Center. Deputy Director, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Want to just jump in, get your take on the expectations overall for Debby as we go through the next couple of days.
Well, I'm going to start with what I think is the most important message for your viewers and listeners. It's the heavy rainfall and potentially historic flooding that may take place this week over the next several days. Anywhere in this purple area has a high risk, the highest risk that we carry in our products, a high risk of life-threatening flooding from heavy rains. And I know it's hard for people to believe that rain can be life-threatening because we see it all the time, but we're talking about rainfall rates that it will exceed the ability for the water to flow and discharge and create all sorts of flooding problems.
And a lot of that threat comes from the fact that Debby, a bit perhaps unusual in the fact that it's going to be a very slow-moving system, correct?
Yeah, so after it makes landfall here sometime during the morning tomorrow over the Florida Panhandle or Florida Big Bend area, notice that the dots here on my map get really, really close together. That means it is slowing to basically a crawl, and it's just sitting there. All that tropical moisture is just sitting there, and it's just going to rain over the same areas for multiple days, which is an unfortunate scenario if it plays out, because we're talking about historic flooding.
And speaking a bit more specifically to the impacts across South Carolina, we're of course based here in upstate South Carolina, but many folks in this area perhaps have relatives closer to the coast. They vacation at the coast themselves. Could you give us a more detailed breakdown of, in terms of rainfall, winds, things like that, of what people at the coast can expect?
Yeah, so it's really going to be a sort of south and east, so certainly primarily at the coastline. You can see we've already got a flood watch from basically Columbia south. The heaviest is going to be at the immediate coastline, and I'll explain why, because it might not be intuitive. At the same time as you got all this heavy rain, you're going to get a storm surge, which is the salt water push from the winds wrapping around the east side of the storm. So you basically got water from the ocean and in the rivers running together and colliding, and where that collision happens, which will be right along the coastline, we really have a high potential for big time flooding.
And overall, how would you say, is Debby comparable potentially to other storms that have hit South Carolina in the past, or potentially just other tropical systems like it that have perhaps behaved the same way? Can you think of any events that would be comparable?
So it's a great question. It's probably one of the most common questions we get, but unfortunately every storm behaves a little bit differently. And in the case of flooding, that's especially the case, because they'll lay down a flooding footprint that'll be a little bit unique in each situation, each community. So I wouldn't compare storms in this case, because I want people to focus not on the past, but I want them to focus on the future and what they can do to prepare for this storm coming now. And if you're in this eastern portion of South Carolina, or better yet, if you're upstate South Carolina and you know somebody down east in the low country, call them and tell them to get ready for this, because I think it's going to catch a lot of people by surprise.
And speaking specifically to that then, what exactly can folks do, or should they be doing now in the next couple of days to prepare?
I would be, if I were in this situation and I were in this part of South Carolina, I would be gathering up the supplies and essentials that I need to stay home for multiple days this week, meaning Monday through Wednesday. At a minimum, the rains could start as early as tomorrow. Tomorrow morning might be the last chance you got to go out and get those supplies and stay home. Just driving around in heavy rain, I know it's hard to believe, just driving around in heavy rain can be really life-threatening, because you get all sorts of water ponding up on roads that sometimes you can't see how deep it is.
So true. Turn around, don't drown, the phrase we, of course, always like to remind folks of. Last question for you, Deputy Director. More specifically to upstate South Carolina and the western North Carolina mountains. What kind of impacts, since we're a bit potentially, at least according to current forecast, more on the periphery of the storm. What kind of impacts can we expect here, and what should folks in this area be prepared for?
On the current forecast, but I mean forecasts change. On the current forecast, you'd be sort of on the flank of this, or the edge, if you will, of this heavier rain. So you would get, maybe several inches of rain. But the bulk of the heavy rain, which is this orange and red area on the map, again from Columbia southward to the coast.
All right. Well, again, Jamie Rhome, Deputy Director of the National Hurricane Center. Thank you so much, sir, for taking some time out of your very busy schedule there. We know we'll be paying close attention to this system along with you folks at the National Hurricane Center over the next few days. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.